All I said was that you have to be a better human, and that if you have to get a passport essentially to go get coochie, then that says something about you. Why? Because there's millions of people here in America, including people that travel overseas. So if you can't get a girl here, then good luck getting a girl anywhere else. And you also want to know why?
22 hours ago, March 4th, another story. Reflections on China's declining population. India, according to the latest United Nations World Demography Report, is now the most populous country on the planet. That's not because the Indians are avid followers of the Kama Sutra. It's rather due to the champion China slipping to second place. This appears to be in turn the consequence in large part of a state population control policy in the 1970s that requires couples not have more than one child. Violators faced severe sanctions, job loss, heavy fines, or imprisonment. I had a landlord while I was living in China. I was living in Shanghai. I had an apartment in Guoding Road, not far from Fudan University. It was pretty much down the block. It was walking distance. My landlord had more than one kid, and he told us that the fine that he had to pay was about 10,000 US dollars, I believe. So it was possible to have more than one kid. It's just that you face a tremendous fine. The farmers in China wouldn't have been able to pay that fine. The writer does not suggest there's a contest in prolificity between China and India. The latter during the first term of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi waged under a state of emergency, a draconian campaign to vasectomize mainly the poor male population. Millions died from botched operations. Victims were dragged from their homes to unsanitary improvised operating tables. With Gandhi's campaign likened to Hitler's sterilization of the Jews, gays, the disabled, and the elderly. The Congress Party lost the elections held afterwards, and Gandhi was booted out of office. Now, here's a question for you who are listening to this. Here's a simple question. You can respond to this in the comments. Until you actually heard me say it just now and read it, how many of you actually knew that India had a male sterilization process? Not probably many of you. So when I'm bringing up a lot of this stuff, but I'm bringing up Christmas cake, and I'm bringing up Shungnu, and I'm bringing up all these little things, these little historical facets. It's important for you to remember that you're not going to hear this stuff on the regular news or the fake news. That's the fake news. When you turn on MSNBC, you turn on CNN. That's fake news right there. You're not going to hear the real news. You're going to hear the real news here. Because some people might say, how is it that something is possible? But the real news ain't going to tell you. They're just not going to tell you because maybe it hurts feelings, or maybe it doesn't sound right, or maybe somebody gets triggered. It's like I don't get triggered when I'm reading the truth. So, at the end of 2022, mainland China's population stood at 1.411 billion, down by 800,000 from the previous year. That's not bad compared to the last downturn a decade ago. The Great Leap Forward, Mao Zedong's instant industrialization program that forced farmers to abandon their fields and induced a famine that cost the lives of over 8 million people. One-child policy. Actually, China's one-child policy has its pros and cons. It is widely credited for China's economic miracle by allowing the country's economic growth to outpace the population growth, which everyone saw as too fast. Observers also attribute China's phenomenal rise as a global economic powerhouse to the quality of the generations produced by the policy. Healthy, better, educated, aggressive, and competitive. So let me just say what this means right here. As many people who've insulted the Chinese government and talk bad about how PRC is racist and how it's communist and whatnot, the reality is the policies of the PRC government ultimately lifted more than 400 million people out of poverty. Now, compare that with America's population. America has 330 some odd million people who are slowly declining into poverty. Now, one of the things that I've always said about China and why China was so important is because China, because of the number of people there and the cheapness of labor, and this is something you also see throughout all of Southeast Asia. That's why if you think about the majority of your clothes are either made in Vietnam or Cambodia, the majority of them are made in Indonesia. Your sneakers are made possibly in Indonesia, the Philippines, so forth and so on. Because they have so many people, labor is cheap. And because labor is cheap, that allows them to have high productivity. Economics 101 teaches us that consumerism is not what grows your economy. Production grows your economy. Just think about it. A baby can't produce their own food. They can only consume. Without the provider, a baby would die. It is the producer that is what makes out here. For example, if you were just a person running around out there in a field and you had no food, you'd be looking for plants. Plants are heterotrophs. All they need is sunlight, and they use carbon dioxide, and they produce sugar. Those are producers. Producers grow your economy, not consumers. That's just what it is. We're living in a place that's almost $32 trillion in debt because they have convinced you that in order to grow your economy, you need to consume, you need to use welfare, you need to use debt. That's the reason why you're $32 trillion in debt. That's the reason why the Federal Reserve feels they need to raise interest rates. So y'all ain't trying to hear this. This is too much real news right here. Y'all ain't trying to hear this. All right, so where are we? One such factor was the Chinese traditional preference for male children to female children. So the Chinese would abort female fetuses, abandon female fetuses, and they would favor having that one child be a male. Nobody wants a female child. The only people who want a female child are people who, for whatever reason, absolutely want a female child. The reality is, because production was so important, they were focused on having more males because males are the ones doing the difficult, dangerous, and dirty jobs. A lot of males have died in China. Scaffolding accidents used to be tremendously high. They've been declining, but in Asia and Southeast Asia, they have a lot of accidents when it comes to building buildings. In fact, while I was in China, I actually saw one such building accident. I believe I even took pictures of it. It says there were reports of outright female infanticides. So what eventually happened was, because they were getting rid of female babies, eventually they started having aggressive adoption tactics. And obviously a lot of these Western women with no children decided that, they'd be the first to line up and take a Chinese female baby. Because, they themselves weren't having children, and they also wanted to save these children from death. As conditioned by this customary bias against girls, the policy resulted in some 32 million boys not being able to find brides when they reach marriageable age. China's gender ratio was 116 boys to 100 girls. Heaven knows how the leftover bachelors cope with their biological and hormonal urges. Polyandry? Did they share their wives with their buddies? Let me just say this. When I was in China, and this was a while ago, this was between 2001 and 2003, when I was there as a student, one of the things that I heard constantly was that females were being kidnapped from internet cafes. Because here's the thing. Before we had iPhone and smartphones in 2007, before we had easy, cheap laptops and internet access, most people there in China, they would go to internet cafes, and the internet cafes were a growth industry. People would go there, play video games. People would go there to use chat, like QQ chat. And the reality was, in a lot of these rural areas, women were being kidnapped left and right. When I say women, I basically mean girls, young women, so forth and so on. And even the police were in on it in some of those villages. And the Chinese put a lot of people to the death penalty for kidnapping these Chinese girls. And I think it's gotten better in recent years, but the thing about it is the kidnappings haven't ceased. There's a country called Kyrgyzstan where a lot of young girls still face that. They face kidnapping and being forced into brides. See, I think one of the things that annoys me about the news is when they talk about trafficking, human trafficking, which we refer to as the transport bros here in order to, not bother the YouTube censor. But the crazy thing about when they phrase things like that is that they're basically obfuscating the reality and the truth of what's actually happening. You see, what was really happening when you hear now, you hear about Chinese men, human trafficking in Laos. They're not human trafficking. What these Chinese men are doing is they're trying to create a bride market. Now, you can think that that's evil. You could think whatever you want. They don't give a fuck. The Chinese are over there. They're doing whatever they're doing, and they ain't thinking about you. I can promise you that. They don't give a shit what you think. The reality is, just as this article's pointing out, there's a large number of Chinese males who have no wives, and they have no way to get wives. So what it ends up being is China is trying to figure out ways to keep up its population, but they also have to service the needs of these men one way or another. The last thing you want in your society is a large number of unwed males. And just as we're seeing in America with the rise of violence, if you have a large number of unwed males, they have nothing to lose. They suffer from grief. They suffer from enemy, just like I've been talking about with black males in America. When you have a large growing number of unwed males, you're going to have serious societal problems. You're going to have absolutely problems with violence. Chinese government doesn't want to have to deal with that, so they're trying to figure out ways to address the issue. The governments themselves are in on this. They have changed the one-child policy. They're actually promoting, oh yeah, you could go out and have 3 children. They're actually saying, they actually literally said that. And they're also making it easier for Chinese men to go to foreign countries like Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, so forth and so on. Now, the South Korean women, the Japanese women, unless these Chinese men are rich, they don't want these Chinese men. So when they, it's funny, they make fun of American men who use their economic advantages to go overseas and get women. They make fun of these men, but they have, see, most of these people in America, let's just face it, most of these people are not world travelers. They are not world learned. They don't know anything that's going on. This is one of the reasons why I like reading these articles to you. Because if I can get you to listen to this stuff, at least you learned something. These people are stupid. They don't know what's going on over there. That's why it's like at the beginning of the beginning of this video, you got one of these chicks say, oh yeah, well, if you can't get a woman here, you can't get them anywhere else. That's not true at all. No, just by virtue of you being an American man with American money, there are women overseas who are ready to be your wife, have your family, as long as you are giving her a step up out of the poverty or the lackluster life she has. Understand, a lot of these women work overseas. These women have careers. The problem is, as I told you, with these Japanese men and these Korean men and these Chinese men, if you're older than a certain age, they refuse to marry you. Let's just understand that. There are working, independent, all the ladies, independent, throw your hands up in the air. All the ladies, get money, throw your hands up in the air. Charlie, how your angels get down like that? Tell me how your angels get down like that. There are independent women overseas, and they have careers. But because of their age, they've gotten their career, they're working a job, but because of their age, the men refuse to marry them. No one Christmas kicker! No! No one Christmas kicker! Leftover cake is no good! No! That's just what it is. What would the Chinese say? Booyah Shong Yu! Booyah! Booyah Shong Nu! Booyah Shong Yu! Booyah! Wo booyah! Booyah Shong Nu! I don't want this 生育. 不要. 我不要. They know what I'm talking about. And that's just what it is, guys. Like, I can leave the articles, the links and everything, because you could actually see where I'm reading from. You don't have to be a PhD to understand this, but I want you to look at this. Now here, this right here. In fact, let me read this small part right here. Because this is exactly when you've got these ridiculous dummies on TikTok, and I'm really hoping Congress here in America hurries up and bans TikTok. I don't care what the excuse is. Call it a national security threat. Call it a PRC espionage tactic. I don't care what your excuse is. Hurry up and ban TikTok because you've got too many stupid people pooling on TikTok. But anyway, this is what they refer to when they're talking about human trafficking. Look at this. Filipino workers to China. When I say that the government of China is trying to do things to address the issue, one of the most logical things you could do is bring in more and more foreign women. Like, for example, if I knew that I wanted to help the men, if I was the president or if I was Congress, and I wanted to make it so that, I'm Congress, I'm saying, our population's declining, our birth rate's declining, what are we going to do? I have an idea. Because these men are having so many problems with these women, what we're going to do is we're going to flood the country with women, but we're going to get foreign women from foreign countries who are interested in marriage, right? So that's what the Chinese government is doing. Filipino workers to China. The government is actively getting Philippine, Vietnamese, Laos, Cambodian, all of those Southeast Asian women, the Chinese government is inviting them to come there and work. America was doing the same thing. We had H-1B visas, and we were trying to get these Filipino women to come over here and teach in our schools. I had read a story like that a long time ago about Chicago. The thing about it is these poor Filipino teachers, now they're coming from the Philippines, which for the most part their government has order, and they're going to teach in Chirac. That's where they're going to teach. It's insane. It says, with the report of China's declining population has come speculation that the country will be opening its labor markets to foreign workers soon. To some, it is certitude given the current ambitious plans of China for the expansion of its economy, including the building of more free ports and industrial states that have made China the manufacturing center of the world. And why wouldn't China think of sourcing its foreign workers from the Philippines? They are close by. They have a solid reputation as skilled and conscientious workers. It seems opportune for the concerned authorities of the two countries to negotiate a labor agreement. With respect to the problem of leftover bachelors, the solution may be found in the Philippines. The possibility is suggested by the long history of Chinese migration to the Philippines. From time immemorial, the Chinese have left their country as single individuals and found wives among the inhabitants of the Philippines. There must have been countless of them. More than 70% of the entire Filipino nation are said to have Chinese blood. The two people have proved to be highly compatible. Their unions have produced no less than the national hero Jose Rizal, the freedom fighters of the Philippine Revolution, and innumerable political and business and industrial leaders of the country. They have been mostly happy. To our knowledge, no Chinese has come down in history as a wife beater. Now, I don't believe that for a second about no Chinese man being a wife beater, because they be drinking that fire water, and once they get some of that in there, they whip the shit out their wife. When I lived in China, I saw domestic violence things on television. So listen, I'm not saying that that's a good thing, because obviously it's not. I'm just saying that it happens, and if you're NYPD and you're getting called to a Chinese apartment or a house here in New York, chances are there's some domestic violence going on. But anyway, it shouldn't be surprising, though, certain Filipino women today snub their Chinese suitors or tell them to go burn in hell. The Chinese have a growing reputation as bullies. Filipinos from all walks of life are incensed by the claims and activities of the Chinese in the West Philippine Sea. Imagine drawing a line on a map with no real basis and claiming ownership of everything within that line, and enforcing their claim by threat of war and daily harassment of Filipinos, ordinary and in authority. Okay, so for those of you who don't pay attention to what's going on in the world because you don't travel, you don't have a passport, you don't know shit, the Chinese, let me just say a couple of things. The Chinese, number one, they've been taking sand and they've been dumping sand into the ocean. And the Chinese have literally been building islands in order to expand their territory. Here's the problem. In the South China Sea, you've got other countries that claim airspace there. You've got Taiwan, you've got Philippines, you've got South Korea, you've got Japan. The fear is that China is literally encroaching on their borders and their airspace and literally taking over their borders and their airspace. China is doing exactly what America did in the Western Hemisphere. If you take a look in the Western Hemisphere, Canada has almost no people in it. Canada has fewer people in it than California does. It's like less than 42 million. And Canada's airspace basically belongs to America, because if you really think about it, America is the center of NATO, and America has basically taken over Canada's airspace to the point where, yes, America and Canada are obviously allies, but there's not really enough people in Canada to challenge anything. Canada relies on America. Canada is basically an American colony. It basically is. Yeah, they've got a flag. Yeah, they've got a national anthem. But when you're talking about less than 42 million people next to a country that has 330 million people in it, I think it's obvious who's in control there. We're still blockading Cuba. Think about that. Cuba is 90 miles off the coast of America. And America is still controlling and ruining Cuba's economy. Venezuela is not that far away. It's like less than 1,000 miles away from America's border to Venezuela because it's, at the tip of South America. America has put sanctions all over Venezuela's economy to the point where they can't even control their own goddamn oil. They can't sell their oil because America's got sanctions all over them. Sanctions that Joe Biden tried to lift when we started our war, our proxy war with Russia, because they were determined to get rid of Russia's cheap energy and get it from somewhere else. And we were trying to quietly lift sanctions on Venezuela. My thing is, if you talk all this free market bullshit and all this democracy nonsense, then doesn't it make sense that Venezuela, who's right here in your hemisphere, should have a free market and they should have democracy and be able to do what they want to do? But see, you already know the truth. America's racist and America's full of shit. And America's own policies are destroying itself. America's at war with itself at this point. Now, the Chinese, I have to give them credit. They woke up. Chinese started putting together policies and they say, okay, you know what, we've got to address this issue. Let's do something about this. You know what, it may not work 100%, but we're going to do something about it. Totalitarian, authoritarian government. Instead of thinking for the short term, they're actually focused on the long term, because the long-term goal of the Chinese is to make sure America gets beaten. That's their long-term goal. China was suing for peace between Russia and Ukraine. China doesn't want a war raging off its borders. Y'all ain't trying to hear the real news. Y'all just go back and keep listening to that idiot Rachel Maddow, and you go back and listen to those morons on MSNBC who wear their big, thick glasses to make themselves look like college professors, since you morons have a Pavlovian response to seeing somebody like that. Go keep listening to them and see how much more of your tax dollars that they can steal right out of your pocket while that they're financing your replacements to come here illegally. Go ahead, keep listening to MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. Y'all just do that, because y'all ain't trying to hear the real news. This is the real news right here. The world news is the real news, but y'all ain't trying to hear that. So here's the story. Japan births fall to record low as population crisis deepens. by Jesse Young and Mayumi Maruyama. Maruyama. That's Mayumi Maruyama. Okay. The number of births registered in Japan plummeted to another record low last year, the latest worrying statistic in a decades-long decline that the country's authorities have failed to reverse despite their extensive efforts. The country saw 799,728 births in 2022, the lowest number on record and the first ever dip below 800,000. According to statistics released by the Ministry of Health on Tuesday, that number has nearly halved in the past 40 years. By contrast, Japan recorded more than 1.5 million births in 1982. Japan also reported a record high for post-war deaths last year at more than 1.58 million. Deaths have outpaced births in Japan for more than a decade, posing a growing problem for leaders of the world's third largest economy. They now face a ballooning elderly population along with a shrinking workforce to fund pensions and health care as demand from the aging population surges. Japan's population has been in steady decline since its economic boom of the 1980s and stood at 125.5 million in 2021. According to the most recent government figures, its fertility rate of 1.3 is far below the rate of 2.1 required to maintain a stable population. Let me just stop right there. When you hear them throw out numbers like this, basically what they're saying is, in order for a population to remain stable, when they say 2.1, there's no such thing as 0.1 people. You can't slice a person into a freaking decimal. What they're basically saying is that the average couple needs to be having at least 3 children in order to keep their population stable. Because obviously there's always going to be a number of deaths. There's always going to be infant mortality. So basically what they're saying is, on average, you need to be able to have at least 3 children on average for your typical married family. Now, I don't want to divert because I want to get back to reading the story, but I've pointed this out before. In America, what's happening is we're seeing failure of marriage. The men don't trust the women don't trust the men. They're not getting married. The few births that are happening are mostly unwed single mothers. These are illegitimate births. These are Jon Snow bastards. Bastards, you're bastards. That's what we're having. That's what we're seeing right now. So what did the government decide to do? Because here's the problem. One of the things that you learn in economics 101, the health of the state is live births. So if the government can't force you to have sex and force you to have children, no matter what they do, if they can't force you to do that, what's their next step? Their next step is to let in illegal aliens. And that's where it always ends up going. The same thing that's happening in Japan right now is also happening throughout Europe. Now, we could take a look at what's happening in countries of Eastern Europe. For example, if you were to look at the female to male ratio in, say, Belarus or even Russia or Moldova, if you take a look at the majority of those countries, the female to male ratio is very high, many more females than there are males. Add to that the wars and the conflicts, and the men are dying off like flies, especially with Russia versus Ukraine. So what you're basically seeing, Western society, including America being involved with Japan, America being involved with South Korea, Western society is literally tearing itself down. Literally tearing itself down. And as it tears itself down, capitalism itself is a good thing, but the problem is capitalism, as we're probably going to talk about later in this article, capitalism can cause issues with your population, such as high cost of living, unpayable rent, women competing with men. We'll get into that later. But the issue is every single thing that this Western culture has basically touched is falling apart. It's literally destroying itself. It's like at a certain point, you have an entire culture that says, you know what, I just want to off myself. And that's basically what's happening here. So I'll get back to that. It says its fertility rate of 1.3 is far below the rate of 2.1 required. The country also has one of the highest life expectancies in the world. In 2020, nearly 1 in 1,500 people in Japan were over 100 years old, according to the government data. These concerning trends prompted a warning in January from Prime Minister Fumio Kishida that Japan is on the brink of not being able to maintain social functions. In thinking of the sustainability and inclusiveness of our nation's economy and society, we place child-rearing support as our most important policy, he said, adding that Japan simply cannot wait any longer in solving the problem of its low birth rate. It's now or never to reverse Japan's population crisis, Prime Minister says. A new government agency will be set up in April to focus on the issue, with Kishida saying in January that he wants the government to double its spending on child-related programs. But money alone might not be able to solve the multi-pronged problem, with various social factors contributing to the low birth rate. Japan's high cost of living, limited space, and lack of child care support in cities makes it difficult to raise children, meaning fewer couples are having kids. Urban couples are also often far from extended family in other regions who could help provide support. In 2022, Japan was ranked one of the world's most expensive places to raise a child, according to research from financial institution Jefferies. And yet, the country's economy has stalled since the early 1990s, meaning frustratingly low wages and little upward mobility. The average real annual household income declined from 6.59 million yen, that's $50,600, to $43,300. So these people have basically lost about $7,000 worth of wage, according to 2021 data from the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. Attitudes towards marriage and starting families have also recently shifted, with more couples putting off both during the pandemic, and young people feeling increasingly pessimistic about the future. Well, obviously, that's exactly what's going on here. However, what I wanted to add was countries like Philippines and Thailand, they were actually worried that they were going to end up having a birth pandemic simply because they had basically shuttered most stores. Their adult population was locked at home. And basically the thought is if you put these people at home, they're going to start fucking and then they're going to start having lots of kids. So there was a fear that there was going to be a baby epidemic after the pandemic had ended. It's a familiar story throughout East Asia, where South Korea's fertility rate, already the world's lowest, dropped yet again last year in the latest setback to the country's efforts to boost its declining population. Meanwhile, China is inching closer to officially losing its title as the world's most populous country to India after its population shrank in 2022 for the first time since the 1960s. So this is where the story ends, and I want you to pretty much notice that all they could do is allude to the fact that there have been changes in attitudes towards having families. And there's been issues getting health care and child care, possibly because the families usually live in the rural areas while the younger people go towards the cities like Tokyo, and they are having issues, basically having families. So, after having been to Japan, and after recently having spent summer in Seoul, South Korea, and I did a lot of traveling around South Korea, beautiful country. But it doesn't surprise me the reason why this is happening. And unfortunately, I have to blame, first of all, capitalism, and I also have to blame feminism. And in this case, liberal feminist or feminazism, whatever you want to call it. You see, unfortunately, what's happened, if you were to go to Japan or if you were to go to South Korea, what you'd probably find is that most of the women are basically, just like they are in America, they're competing with the men. And when I say competing with the men, the women are putting off family planning in order to spend more time in school and in order to spend more time at work. Now, here's the problem. These cultures, they, unlike, America's culture is just sinking down the toilet faster than you can imagine. But here, up until I'll say recently, it was a little bit easier for women to waste their youth and waste their wombs and have some other man's kids and then try to settle down with some simp, and he could be the plan B. He could be the stepfather. He could be the cleanup bro. It was easy to do that. Over in Japan and South Korea, it don't work like that. Over there, first of all, you can't settle down with just any woman. Even though their marriages are not necessarily arranged, the family, the parents, the grandparents typically have to check off on who you're going to marry. And they are brutal. Those grandparents, if they think that your chick that you bring home, if they think that she's ugly, oh, no, she's ugly. And they say that shit. They will literally say it. Chinese, if they think your girlfriend's fat, oh, Taon Pong. And they'll say she's fat in Chinese, just, oh, Taon Pong. Like, they'll say that shit. They will say it right out. Or they'll call her old. They'll say she looks old, or she looks fat, or she's ugly. Like, they got no filter. They say that shit. The grandparents, if the grandparents don't approve and the parents don't approve, that might put a big hole in whether or not you and that person get married. Another issue is age. Age specifically. I know you want to hear it. The Chinese, if the women get too old, if the women are over the age of like 27, the Chinese have a term called shengnu. Shengnu means leftover woman. The Japanese, they celebrate Christmas, and they typically will make Christmas cakes, and they'll give those Christmas cakes as gifts. They don't give regular gifts like we give. Like, they don't wrap up like, presents and stuff. No. They'll give Christmas cakes. And the problem is, it's just like fruit cake in the old days. You remember how they used to give you fruit cake and it would taste like rum? Sometimes it was good, sometimes it wasn't, but people would save it and they wouldn't eat it right away. Well, the Japanese give those cakes as Christmas, and they don't always eat them right away. And because they don't eat them right away, sometimes they get left over. So the term went from Japanese men calling women who got old, they called them Christmas cake. That term mutated into, we're going to call you leftover cake. Now, if you were to ask, here's the thing. In America, some men, they'll just marry a woman regardless what her age is. They'll just accept that. Like, for example, like, we're watching this Michael B. Jordan, this whole thing where Michael B. Jordan is seeing these women from his youth, the women who used to make fun of him and didn't think he'd ever be anything. And then once he becomes a big star, now he's seeing them and he's the big man. He's got the muscles. He's got the money. He's got the Bentley, the Rolls Royce, all that. And they ain't got nothing. And the thing about it is, Michael B. Jordan, he's, regardless what his age is, he could get younger women. He could go all the way down to 20, maybe even 19, if he really wanted to. Just like Leonardo DiCaprio. And the thing about it is, Japanese, they act kind of like that. They treat themselves as if they're high value men. They're not gonna date women their own age. No, they're gonna get younger wives. And God forbid they call you leftover cake, or God forbid they call you Christmas cake. Because once you pass that, 27? Once you pass that age of 27, Japanese men, they ain't having it. And if you go to these Japanese men, and let's say Japanese man is like 30, 35, and you're like, hey, how do you feel about getting a leftover woman? He is absolutely going to look right at you in your face, and his eyes are going to narrow, and he's going to get upset. And he's going to look right at you, and his eyes are going to narrow, and he's going to be like, no, what the Christmas cake? No, No! No want the Christmas kega! No! Never! No! Forgive us, please! No want the Christmas kega! They're not having it. They're just not having it. So, that's part of the problem. These women trying to get the bag, trying to make the money, they are competing with these Japanese men, and they're wasting their time because ultimately those men are still going to make their money. The only difference is those men are going to aim for younger wives, and they're going to leave those older Japanese women hanging. Same thing goes for the Chinese women. Same thing goes for the South Korean women. They all are doing the same damn thing. So what does that mean? What that means is that you've got families that don't get produced, children that don't get born. But I will say this. Just like America has done its best to start letting illegal immigrants in. Now, see, America makes the illegals legal and keeps them. At one point, you're hearing about them being bussed in and they're being dropped off in front of Kamala Harris's house. The next thing you hear is we can give them apartments. Like, wait a minute. How the fuck are we giving them apartments when we're supposed to be shipping them out? But that's the government. See, the problem is you got to always understand Economics 101. The health of the state is live births. You know what that means? That means, okay, you're a white man, you're a black man. If you're not fucking and you're not having children, they will replace you. They will bring in somebody who will. And because you're so busy going back and forth to your job, you've got no time to think about it. Your stupid ass is going to end up paying taxes for those illegals that they bring in to replace your ass. It's kind of funny, like when I think about people who work in robotics. A person who works in robotics is ultimately doing their best to develop new technology that's going to take their own job. You're hearing all this shit about AI, Chat GPT. You're hearing about these robots that they've got factories that are fully roboticized. It's like the better you get at this STEM technology, you're ultimately creating the technology that's literally going to replace you. It's just that simple. But on a more devious note, you're basically working, busting your ass, going to your job every day just to watch the demographics around you change. And they're going to keep bringing in people who are going to have 6 and 7 kids. And you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, how are these people having 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 kids? Who's paying for this? But unfortunately, when you point a finger at somebody, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. And you know what you're going to finally figure out sooner or later? You're like, oh, I'm paying for it. My stupid ass kept going to work every day, busted my ass, and my taxes kept going up. My property taxes kept going up, and I was paying for my replacements. And that's what's happening. In Japan, South Korea, and China, all of them are experiencing basically the same thing. What's happening is these people are busting their ass working. Prices are going up. Wages are going down. So what does that do? That causes them to bust their asses even more working. It's a vicious cycle. The women, now that, they're leftover cake, well, they got to go out and work because they don't have a man who's going to allow them to be a stay-at-home wife. They got to go out and bust their ass. So what does that mean? They're going to be out there working, competing with the men. So what that means is that now you got fewer jobs. And guess what? Most of these governments, these women outvote the men because there's more women than there are men. So they're going to vote for welfare. Guess what that means? Taxes go up. Japan printed itself into a recession. And they caused, decades-long recession. And they're still in recession, as you can see. They screwed themselves over real bad. Here's the problem, though. I think America basically headed in that exact same direction. When you look at the Federal Reserve keeps raising interest rates. But unless they actually raise the interest rates to meet the level of inflation, like unless if the inflation is 11%, if they don't raise the interest rates to 11%, then they're not really fighting inflation. What they're basically doing by keeping interest rates anywhere around 5 or 6, that's actually a how should I say, that's a stimulative effect because they're not meeting the inflation where it is. Well, you think these women want to hear that bullshit? You think these women are going to be like, yeah, let's vote to allow the Fed to raise interest rates so I can lose my credit card and I won't be able to pay for my Gucci bag. You think the women want to hear that bullshit? Of course not. So you've got women who are voting for a perpetual welfare state, and your dumbass is showing up to jobs every day, busting your ass, working harder and harder, working yourself to the bone so that you can help afford this welfare state. Now, I would say that there's light at the end of the tunnel because now we're hearing more and more reports about men dropping out of the workforce. You're hearing these news reports, men are dropping out of the workforce. The men are saying, fuck this. It's like, why should I bother? It's like I bust my ass. I can't afford my rent. I can't afford to have anything nice. And these women won't fuck me because I ain't got no money. So bottom line is the men are dropping out. You've seen these stories. They're everywhere. The men are dropping out of the workforce. The participation rate's low. Men are dropping out of college. Men are refusing to go to these universities. You know what that's doing? Ask these college professors how easy it is for them to get paid now that they're losing students. Now that those classrooms aren't getting filled. Now that those rooms aren't getting filled. Those lecture halls aren't getting filled. You don't really have to have a PhD to understand what's going on here. I feel bad for these people who are literally putting themselves deep into debt because they want to be academics and they can't figure this shit out. It's basic. It's very, very basic. But most of these people, they don't know economics, or they don't understand it, or they believe in the politics rather than the actual simple basic math. But I guess that's just what it is. So yeah, this is a big story right now. They're talking about it right now. Me personally, I think, just like I showed you a story already, there were stories recently where Japan was advertising cheap houses for sale in the countryside. Because the problem is, these younger people, the younger Japanese, they don't want to live in the countryside in these traditional houses. It's cold. It's like they don't have all the amenities that they want. You think they got high-speed internet and a freaking pagoda? The answer is no. And this story, they were talking about government selling houses $500 and to populate the rural areas. Most of these people aren't biting because the problem is they've moved so far towards the flashy city, and this is part of the reason why, as it says in the story, that they're having so much trouble putting together families. It's like you can't grow a family inside these little apartments that they've got in Japan, or I mean, it's not going to be comfortable. You know, you got a screaming baby in a little ass apartment. No. And CNN also had this story about how easy is it to restore one of these Japanese countryside homes. Expats buy Japanese country house for a song and get way more than they bargained for. Look at that. Paul and Kimberly Fradali stand in front of their traditional kaminka. And it's fun. It's sad because they have some pretty houses. These things look nice, but when you've got to restore these things, it ain't that easy. These things are expensive. And you're talking about these handmade materials, and in many cases, it's hard to find those people to still do it. It says, what does it say? You can buy a home with a modest lot for as little as $20,000 depending on location. Some towns even maintain lists of free or nearly free houses. I had read a story for you where they were selling these houses less than $4,000. There are no restrictions on foreigners. Now listen to this. Passport bros, listen to this. There are no restrictions on foreigners buying land or property in the country, and no citizenship or resident visa is required. That said, without a work visa or permanent resident status, obtaining a loan can be difficult. Foreign buyers typically opt to pay cash for this reason. With so many houses available for so little, however, cash should not be an issue. The Fradalis, who live and work in Japan year-round, waited until they achieved permanent resident status before they purchased their home. They didn't want to have to leave the country every 3 months to renew a tourist visa in the event of an unforeseen job loss. They also spent a lot more money than they could have, roughly $250,000 US, but their 130-year-old home came with about 3/4 of an acre of land, a fully mature garden with a giant Japanese cherry tree and ancillary buildings such as the kora, a type of earthen-walled storehouse. And it says, why are these country houses abandoned? It says the Fradalis say most young Japanese people have little interest in an old house, particularly one far from the city, lacking modern conveniences. And that's the story. Now, there's more story there. You can look it up yourself. But the reality is, it's like these younger kids, they're not going for it. They want this city life. They want this influencer style life and shit that they see all over social media. They're not going for this. And furthermore, even if they were going to go for it, they wouldn't have the money to do it without working. So that means that they'd end up back working in the city anyway. So that you can't win. Can't win. The same thing I talked about in Sardinia, Italy. They were trying to get people to come there, and the government was even offering you like $13,000 to $15,000 worth of subsidiary. It says Kim's resignation is painfully clear, says Paul of this photo taken before the house was cleaned out. Yeah, this place looks all junky. You know, I mean, and these are beautiful, beautiful houses. The only downside is it's nothing like living in a regular urban sprawl. It's like when you move to these countrysides, it's like you're on your own. But all of this is bringing it right back to the fact these populations are plummeting. And they really have nothing to blame, but reality is they really have, at the very basis of it, you've got capitalism and you've got feminism. Those two things are doing it. If it was just the men going to work and the women not going to work, or the women staying home, then they'd live off the man's salary and the prices would go down because now you don't have as many women competing. Not only that, you don't have as many women in the market because once the corporations realized that they could get these women to spend top dollar and go deep into debt, corporations were never going to let these women stay home. It wasn't going to happen. And the reality is, you have to understand, what is your purpose? Are you trying to build your population, or are you trying to watch it die off? If you're trying to build your population, having these women in the workforce, that's one way to start getting your population to plummet. And as we can see, the proof is in the pudding. It's all over. It's happening. And you have some people who actually want this to happen because they think that the world doesn't need more than 8 billion people. However, you have all these pro-blacks and you got all these pro-whites and stuff, and we got to do something to rebuild our numbers and everything. And it's like, yeah, but y'all are not fucking. So what are you going to do? No, what you're going to do is you're going to keep on showing up to your job like an idiot and paying taxes for the illegal alien who's going to replace you. And that's just what happens.
For some reason, there's been an influx of passport bro content on my FYP. And I sincerely hope that those ding-dongs go wherever they go and meet up with green card girlies who take them to the cleaner.
I saw you in the live.
You called me a
I'm
bitch.
talking to you right now. You gonna shut the fuck up because you're in my
No,
live.
you called me a bitch,
No,
you
first of all, you can't beat me. You're in a third world country. You're in a third world country. Third world country, you're dirty ass. Dirty,
Love, look at
dirty,
her face.
dirty,
Look at her face.
dirty.
Look at
And
her
I'm
face.
beautiful.
Look at
And
your
look
face.
at you. You look like a fucking mule.
Beautiful where? Beautiful where?
Yep.
Beautiful where?
Mule.
You called me a bitch. These are insulted by your standards. I just defended my fellow Filipinas, you motherfucker. You motherfucker. You motherfucker. No. No. You called me a bitch. I caught it in screen recording. You're going to make it a fucking news. I swear. You're going to be famous here in the Philippines.
Nobody. You the third world country. I'm talking third world people. I don't talk to third world.
Wait.
Stupid ass.
Thank you.
No,
Thank
you think that's
you.
funny?
Case in point,
You, I got the
got
video.
that shit
You ain't that
live,
bitch.
baby. Got him.
No.
Damn, straight got him.
Hold on, Pharaoh. Are
Straight
you
got him.
saying
No.
that the
You
videos
gonna
that
get got
women
because
are
your
making?
account gonna get taken, Jack.
So
No,
Pharaoh, you're
nigga, you
saying
just did that to
Her
yourself.
account gonna get
You
taken.
just did
Both
that
of
to
y'all get
yourself.
taken. I'm telling you right now, Jack, you're not gonna be on TikTok no more. You're not gonna
much
be on
longer.
TikTok no
Yeah,
more.
that they're gonna wrap that one up real quick.
Girl, y'all ain't gonna be on TikTok no more. I'm gonna make it happen.
Okay, Pharaoh, finish.
Okay, so Pharaoh,
Okay?
saying
You gonna
this
make it
is
happen.
Finish
black
telling them,
women
Pharaoh.
in these United States are
Now
making
you
is
y'all say
posing a
goodbye
threat
to New
to
Jack, because
you.
New Jack ain't gonna ever be coming back no more. You wanna
So
bet $1,000 on it? You wanna bet $1,000 on it? You and her account won't be taken?
Well, I've already showed you what's going on in China and what's going on in Japan. Well, I got to round it out by talking about the big third, South Korea. South Korea breaks its own record for world's lowest fertility rate. How about that? Jesse Young and Gaewon Bae. Now, I talked for a while about this. I'm going to just read the preface right here. South Korea's fertility rate, already the world's lowest, has dropped yet again in the latest setback to the country's efforts to boost its declining population. The National Statistics Body reported Wednesday that the fertility rate, or the average number of children expected per woman, fell to 0.78. Now, as you've already seen, and they even say it right here, you need to be having about 2.1 children, which basically means 3 children on average in a couple. You have to be having about 3 children in order to make sure you keep your population up. But they're not. They're having 0.78, down from 0.81 the previous year. So they're going so low until they're breaking their own record. Like, they're breaking unbelievable, right? Like, nobody expected them to go this low. Countries need a fertility rate of 2.1 to maintain a stable population in the absence of immigration. Now, notice that right there. I want y'all to stay. This is what you got to do. When you read, you got to read every fucking word. In the absence of immigration. What's America doing right now to replace your ass? Illegal immigration is becoming legal now. Now they're just letting people in, furnishing them. Now, we've got Americans on the streets in California. Literally, we've got homeless, fentanyl-addicted Americans on the streets in Washington, Oregon, California, and parts of the Northeast Corridor. Here in New York, I see homeless people and mentally ill people, like mostly they're on the trains. You're seeing them getting beaten up by the cops because the cops tell them to get off the train. They refuse, and then the cops drag them off the train. You're seeing homeless people soliciting you here left and right. Like, when I go to some malls, I go to some stores, it's like there's certain places I don't even want to go because I can't even get out my car without people begging me for money. Now, we can finance illegal aliens to come in, but we can't even deal with the problem that we're having with Americans falling down first. That's what you're telling me. Well, you're telling me we can't deal with the problem that we're having with America is falling apart. But we could deal with freaking illegal aliens, though. Right. They're bringing these people in to replace you. But the countries that don't bring in aliens, illegal aliens, the countries that don't bring in these immigrants to work, you have to understand, when you hear somebody say Japan's racist or China's racist or South Korea's racist, I don't like using that term. Those countries, even if they say, yeah, we don't want you here because you're black, which, by the way, when I lived in China, I never had that problem. I met a lot of African students who had Chinese wives, Chinese girlfriends, and I talked to them, and I was like, hey, do you ever have a problem here? And they're like, no. And you're dealing with a country where the cops don't even typically carry guns unless they're military police. So if you're a black man, you don't have to worry about getting shot in the back because a cop thought you were reaching for a cell phone or some shit. Let me just say this. These countries are not, I don't like using the word racist. These countries have a deep long-lasting culture that they want to keep up. If you're a black person and you go to Japan or Korea, you're not part of their culture. Even if you learn to speak their language, you're not part of their culture because you're not genetically one of them. So I can understand why they would be xenophobic. That's the actual proper term, xenophobia. I can understand that. Just like if you go to parts of Africa, they don't intermix with whites, and they certainly don't intermix with foreigners. They only want to keep up their culture, their language, and so forth and so on. But the reality is, without immigration and with their over-reliance on capitalism and liberal feminism, this is what's happening to China, Japan, and South Korea. This is what's happening. This is the facts. All of these countries are being forced to watch their populations decline because their men and their women no longer see eye to eye. See, this is what, when you talk about that equally yoked bullshit, I don't want to hear that. Men have been traditionally hypogamous, Hypo. That means they date down. Women have traditionally been hypergamous. They date up. Hyper means up, Hyper in this case. There ain't no such thing as equally yoked. That. If you're stupid enough to allow yourself to hook up with your quote-unquote equal, don't be surprised when your ass ends up in divorce court. No, the reality is men date down, women date up. Men, it's important because of what a man is and what a man represents. It's important that he have a woman who is dependent on him. His family is dependent on him. This is, again, the reason why you're having so much problem with violence out of these young males. If these young males are sitting up in their mama's house and they sitting in mommy's basement playing PlayStation 5, they playing God of War 2, who's depending on them? Nobody. Their mom is making the money. Their mom is bringing the food home. You've got son husbands, basically. Mom is cooking and cleaning for you. The only thing she ain't doing is effing you. And the reality is, eventually these males biologically, they have an imperative to need to reproduce. Where they go and get it? So sometimes these males, they scatter and skeeter out of their mama's basement. They go out looking for women only to realize that the women don't want them because they don't have anything. They don't have a career. They don't have their own house, so forth and so on. Guess what? That exact same problem is playing itself out in these other countries. In South Korea, Japan, and China, they've got these small-ass apartments. These people don't have houses and shit in most of those areas. When you go to these big cities, it's all apartments. In the rural areas, you have the houses, but as you've seen in the article I already read, these Japanese children, these teenagers, they're not growing up wanting that. They're trying to go to the damn city. There ain't no space to have families. You damn sure ain't having 3 kids if you're living in an apartment like that. You're just not. They are killing themselves. They are destroying their population's going to decline because they're literally destroying themselves. That's what it is. And they won't bring in foreigners because they don't want to change what South Korea is. When I was in South Korea, I mentioned it over and over while I was making videos. There's like no English support. If you're an English person, there's no signs to help you. There's very, very few English signs. Most of the people don't speak to you unless you speak Korean. When I was in Korea, as much as I liked walking around the place, I liked seeing how the place looked and everything. It was a very nice, calm, peaceful place. I felt very isolated simply because I couldn't read the signs and because most people who I tried to talk to couldn't speak English, or at least wouldn't speak English because, they felt shy or they felt embarrassed, they wouldn't speak it. These people, South Korea, Japan, China, they don't want to bring in foreigners. They don't want to bring in foreigners. I would say one of its biggest problems is that South Korea is cut off from North Korea. If South Korea and North Korea weren't at odds, that would actually help their birth rate because they'd be able to reproduce with more Korean people. But, as you can see, America is there keeping that from happening. Even the Koreans who want unification will never get it because, first of all, you got America on the south and you've got China feeding the North Koreans. And what China's basically done is they've created a buffer zone using North Korea. A buffer zone is there to keep America away from you. Same thing is happening in Russia. What is Russia ultimately doing? All you got to do is take a look at the maps. You don't have to be a genius. Russia's creating a buffer zone. Russia is flattening and destroying eastern Ukraine. They don't want those people. Like, think about all those Ukrainian refugees that have ran to Europe. They don't want those people coming back. Those people can never come back. Those buildings have been destroyed. Russia's not worried about destroying those areas. Russia's going to use that as a buffer zone. If they come in there and they do build anything, it'll be missile batteries, surface-to-air missile batteries, SAM sites. That's what they'll do. They don't want those people coming back. They've taken over that entire Donbass region, Luhansk, Donetsk. They've taken it all over. But I'll tell you what, y'all keep listening to Rachel Maddow and MSNBC telling you what to think. Y'all keep doing that. So anyway, in 2022, the country recorded about 249,000 births and 372,000 deaths. Similar demographic declines are being seen in several other Asian countries, which I've already mentioned, including Japan and China, raising concerns there will be too few people of working age to support the ballooning elderly population. Meanwhile, Korean women are also having children later in life. The average age of childbirth in South Korea was 33.5 last year. South Korea spent $200 billion, but it can't pay people enough to have a baby. Damn. Experts say the reasons for these demographic shifts across the region include demanding work culture, stagnating wages, rising cost of living, changing attitudes towards marriage and gender equality. You see right there, man. I rest my case. And rising disillusionment rising disillusion among younger generations. Okay, let's stop right there. What's happening? Liberal feminism. All that equally yoked bullshit, they're destroying you. That's what you're getting. And what are these men doing? What are the passport bros doing? What are the passport Joes, the passport bros, what are they doing? They're going outside to seek women who not only aren't on their level, but are way below it. Because they know that with those women who still want family and still want marriage and still want children, at a young age, not wait until they're freaking 45 years old to start having a family. No want the leftover cake. No want leftover cake. This is just what it is, guys. You're involved in a gender war. That's what you're involved in. War stands for we are right. The only question is, who's going to win? Are you men going to do the smart thing, get your passport and get yourself a younger foreign wife who absolutely wants to be your wife and have children and this, that, and other? Or are you going to be the cleanup bros to these American strags on TikTok who are telling you that they're beyond you, that they travel more than you to Jamaica and Africa so that they can get played with by the Jamaican and African men? Are you going to keep being a cleanup bro to them? Are you going to wait until they're 40 so that you can wife them up? So that after they've been on the carousel all their life, now you get to be a cleanup bro? Is that what you want? Well, I've presented you with the facts. I've presented you with the statistics and all this shit that I pulled off the internet. I've presented you with the actual, this is the battlefield that you're on. So now the question is, who's going to close? Is it going to be you or is it going to be them? Because I'm telling you right now, I ain't nobody's cleanup bro. I ain't nobody's plan B. Despite the fact that now you're seeing a couple of cuckolds on YouTube. Oh, yeah, I share my wife, because, she's going to cheat anyway behind my back. So I share my wife with other guys. Oh, you want to have children? Oh, no, I don't want to have children because, I don't need children. I have an open relationship and I share my wife. Yeah, okay, guys, if that's what you want to do, you know what? You get to be the guy on X Hamster holding the camera while your wife's getting serviced. You know what I'm saying? Is that what you want for yourself? You answer me. Maybe some of you want that. I don't know. If you want that, this is America. You're free to do whatever you want. Is that what you want to be? You want to be a cleanup bro? You want to be a, what are these women calling it now? Trying to convince your stupid ass, what are they saying? Polyamory? I'm poly. Yeah, I'm poly. I'm a poly queen. Because I'm a queen. I'm poly. I'm like a queen bee. The queen bee's got all these other bee suitors in the hive, and I'm a queen bee. Because I'm poly. I'm poly, and my man is a cuck. And he's a cleanup bro. I can have many children as I want. It's my body. I can do what I want. I can have many children with many I want. And you just got to clean it up. In fact, I need your money to help me pay back these student loans from 1995. You tell me, is that what you want for yourself? You just tell me. I don't know. Maybe that's what you want. All you got to do is go down there in the URL chat section and say, yeah, I want to volunteer myself to be a cleanup bro. That's all you got to do. If that's what you want, just say it. Just say it proud. Say, yeah, I want to be a cleanup bro. That's what I want to do. I want to be a cleanup bro. I want to be in a polyamorous relationship where my wife is in the room with Pookie and Ray Ray. And Pookie and Ray Ray are doing their thing. And, I'll just go in and I'll get the sloppy seconds later. If that's what you want for yourself, all you got to do is let me know. And I'll accept it. If that's what you want, all you got to do is say it right in the comment section. I want to be a cleanup bro. I want to be in a poly relationship. Yeah. The option is get your goddamn passport. I guess the question you need to ask the average American man, when you go overseas and you're staying in your condo and you happen to meet a chick just like this, it's like, what goes through a man's mind when he meets a nice chick like this? Now, you know where you'd find this right here? Because a lot of guys be asking me, where do you find this? Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea. And you meet a woman like this. By the way, Thailand. I have to say Thailand, yes. Even Laos and Cambodia. You meet a woman like this, and she is waving to you, and she's giving you the choosing signals. I guess they call it choosing signals. And she's waving to you. She's like, honey, come this way to heaven and paradise. But in order to ensure that your night ends exactly like this, you need someone to help you meet the person of your dreams. For love, for marriage, this is who you should talk to. VietnamWingman.com. Give them a look.
I think a lot of people are unaware of how deep the relationship is between Filipinos and Black people. First of all, everything I'm going to say is public knowledge. If I found it on Google, I'm pretty sure you could too. They used to separate Filipinos and Black people in the US Navy as shown here. One of the first people to discover our islands was an African tribe, and we still have African tribes present in the Philippines as of today. There was also a war between American forces and Filipino president and nationalist Emilio Aguinaldo, where David Fagin, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but he was an African-American soldier who decided to help the Filipinos alongside 2 to 3 other African-American soldiers. And American soldiers used to call Filipinos the N-word too. So yeah, I learned all of this because I googled, can Filipinos wear bonnets, one night, and I went deep into it. Yeah, that's my time. Thank you.
Well, hello everybody. I'm from Thai.
I'm from the Philippines.
We're sitting here long ass time for our passport to come in. So where are you?
We're waiting for the passport, bro.
Don't hate.
Cheers.
To be continued.